What's up, YouTube? We're back. Been playing around with the shovel head. Got that one kind of together over here. I at least got the heads back on and the intake on. There's going to be a video on that later whenever I can get around to posting it. I just have final assembly. Got to put the pipe back on, other push rods, gas tanks, and button this one back up. But she's pretty much done and ready to go. Took a break from that. Now I'm working on the small block for the Ford again. Where we left off, I got the cam in, got the crank and the mains all tightened, torqued down, everything's ready to go. And I finished just brake cleaning and cleaning off all the connecting rods. I got all the pistons on, ready to install, piston rings rather. Those are all on, ready to install. I got a whole gasket set here. I don't know why it's not focusing today. Got the gasket set ready to go. Just some quick block prep and clean up on the parts before they go back in. I got the cam bearing or the rod bearings in a box. I got to dig out and lay all those out. I'll get those installed, show you guys how to do that, and then start slapping these together. I was watching a couple videos on YouTube at some other channels. There's a Mustang guy. I wish I could remember the name of it. I'm feeling bad now, but he was talking about he's got a video 500 horsepower on a stock 302. I think it was boosted, but he goes through a motor build on his. He ended up doing the piston offset thing and flipping the pistons instead of facing forward with all the notches in the pistons like they're supposed to. He flipped them around. He said he's done it on a handful of motors. I think I'm going to try it on this and give you my take on that once it's all done. You know, everybody's arguing about that, or was arguing about that on the internet. I'm a little late to the party. Thought about it on my last motor when I built the motor for the truck. I didn't do it. This one I will be doing that and try to keep you guys updated as it goes. So let me clean up everything and then we'll start putting the rod bearings in. I'll be back in a second. I just got all the old bearings out that I meant to do a while ago, but I didn't. Got everything laid out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 across the table here. Got the new rod bearings sitting over here. And we got the block here. On Fords, your engine order from the front of the car. So front of the motor's over here. If you're looking at it, you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Sorry. Tot, I've been pulling the leaf springs on the Falcon today, which is not at all a fun job in any way, shape, or form. For those of you that have videos on the internet of how to get that front section out, I applaud you. You're also working, many of you that I saw the videos of are on the West Coast where rust and road debris and salt haven't had a chance to eat away at everything and seize all of your parts together. But anyway, back to the block. Looking at the block, we got the pistons. Like I said, I am going to be flipping the order. So when you are looking, this is cylinder 1. I am not putting 1 here. I'm going to put 1 in 5. 2 and 6, 3 and 7, 4 and 8. I'm flip-flopping them. There's a couple things you got to pay attention to when you're doing this. So first things first, here's our piston. Cap goes on. There's no bearing in here right now. But if you guys look at this, you have a flat edge on one side, relatively flat edge on one side, and then on the other side, this is chamfered. The chamfer on this is going to sit towards the crank, the outside of the crank, not the inside. You want this going to flowing oil out the side to the side of the crank. So when you get into putting these together, you got this. Let me grab a rod bearing here. Just like when we were doing the main bearings, you got a little tang retainer in the rod. So that is going to line up with the notch on your cam bearing. Cam bearing has a little elevated notch right here. This slides right in. Press it through. Step it down. You do not want these bearings moving in your motor, so don't oil the back sides or anything. We're going to assembly lube all of these, but we are not doing the back side of the motor. Same thing on the lower cap. you got a notch here. Grab your rod bearing. Line up your tang with the groove. Put them in. Drop it down. Okay. We're pounding the rods or pistons into the block, so we're not going to do anything with the rod mains until after. So the piston's going to go in. This is going to slide in once it's on the bottom side of the crank. Then we're going to just set the nuts kind of loose. Then we'll flip it over and torque everything down. On the assembly table over here, I'm just leaving the rod mains, or the rods and the bearings set up with the bolts over there for now. We'll come back to those. Same thing. Now I'm onto the second rod cap. Line up your tang with the bearing. Press them down in there. Again, make sure all this stuff is clean before you're assembling it. It'll sit just like that. So you got 2 half shells. Same thing on the piston. Take your groove, line it up in the notch, press fit it in, square it up, and that's going to hold your piston rod bearings in place on the crank. I'm not going to walk you through the rest of those. Let me get all of these loaded and then we'll start dropping pistons in the motor. Alright, a couple more things. On your piston orientation, when you drop these pistons into the block, this dash right here on a stock set of pistons, aftermarket's going to be a little bit different, but on a stock set of factory Ford pistons, this notch faces towards the front of the block. Okay, so when you get all the pistons in, all of these are going to be facing forward. In this case, like I said, I am going to be flipping them. This is the number 1 piston. It's going to go in number 5 instead of number 1, which means all of our new parts are going to be facing the back. This comes into play when you get into that bearing chamfer. Here's the chamfered side. So for number 1, that's going to be facing forward. When I turn this around and put it in 5, this is going to kick it back farther on the rod. So the rod's going to be coming this way. The chamfer is facing the back, just like number 5 would be. So let me cue this up and we'll start dropping these in. Fuel line, or I had a bunch of vacuum caps sitting here, so I'm going to cap these, just dropping them onto the crank so you're not scratching up your crankshaft journals. You can do it without if you are careful and kind of support the rod as you're bringing the piston down the bore. So we'll be back. So like I said, rod or piston orientation, this is coming towards the back now. I did just invest in a new fancy tool because I got sick of using the cheapo ring compressor. It's worked on multiple motors. I've used it 3-4 times. They break, they're cheap. I bought one of these off of Amazon. It's a 4-inch bore, tapered cup, checkered flag performance, I guess. Not sponsored or anything else. I just found it on Amazon. It was reasonable. I figured I'd give it a shot. If it works once, I'm happy with that. So you guys can come along as I test this thing out. So number 1 piston, number 5 hole. I got the crank lined up down below on the bottom of the block already. Went ahead and did that first. Oh, hold on 1 second. Anybody want to tell me what I forgot to do first? Sitting here worrying about the dog barking at the neighbors. You want to lube all of these. You want to lube up the cylinder walls and lube the piston rings. Getting excited and getting ahead of myself, so give me a second here. Add some oil. I was using different stuff last time, but I don't know. If you were watching, I cashed out the rest of that bottle on the last one. Just coat the cylinder wall so you got a nice bit of oil on there for your initial startup. Once it fires, it should go real quick. I'm actually going to go through and do all of these so you don't have to stay oily. Stuff's real tacky, real sticky. You don't need this crazy thick assembly lube. Typically in the bore you can just use regular oil too. You will want this on your rod bearings, however. But this is the closest thing I had that's easy to get into these bores. like I said, this will coat the entire wall, and it's real tacky. It'll stick on there. Goes in. Now I get to do the same thing on the rings. Just know I'm a little off camera. I just filled up. This was used for gas last time. Now it's oil. So I'm going to put some regular oil around the rings. And by regular, this is the only oil I have at the house right now. I don't know how I don't have thinner oil, but this is Harley. It's a little thicker than I'd like, but it's thinner than the assembly lube. So we got a nice coating on the rings. I'm just going to work these around a little bit. Now is where you would want to pay attention to your ring gaps if you're concerned about that. I got these all offset already. And since this is going on the back side, we lubed up that. We're going to take a little assembly lube and drop this right here on the rod bearing. Give that a nice healthy coat. And we're going to go to drop this in the bore. These tapered bore things, like I said, I just got this. I haven't actually used it yet, so you're going to find out how it works with me. Drop this right down here, get the piston kind of set up. And the tapered bore, I should just be able to tap this down with a dead blow. So number 1 piston, number 5 hole. I got the crank kind of lined up exactly where this needs to be on the bottom. I like to just put my hand underneath here and kind of guide the piston down. Make sure this squares up in the bore. Now we're into the tapered part of the tool, the piston ring compressor. I'm going to drop this down, just like that, flush on the crank. I'm going to go grab the other end of the bearing. Number 1, again, on Fords these are numbered. The chamfered side is going to go towards the cheek of the crank. Dab of assembly lube here, and I'll just snug up the nut. Don't need a lot, don't need to go crazy, a good generous amount to coat that bearing for startup. Let me take the 2 nuts. I'm not torquing anything, I'm just assembling this so they're not walking around. It stays connected to the crank. I'll show you on the next one because I already forgot on here. But the chamfered side, like I said, goes towards the crank. Okay, tapered side goes towards the crank. Sitting here trying to put it on, I forgot I had caps on. I usually don't run the caps on the rod install. This time I did, and I forgot about it. So that's probably the only one I'll do that way. Main bearings cap is, or rod bearing caps on. I'm just tightening this up, just enough to hold it in place. I'll go hand tight so it's not walking around or the bearings have a chance to move. Again, I'm going to redo all of these once I flip it over after I have all the pistons in. Just running them down, bringing them to the end of their threads on the cap. And then it'll stay hand tight. Alright, so number 1. I will say for a cheap little, I want to say this was like 24, 25 bucks or something on Amazon, maybe. It was less than 30. Definitely recommend it. It's so much easier than trying to fight those cheapo piston ring compressors. The only problem with these, they're bore specific, so this one will work on a 4-inch, it won't work on anything else. Alright, so 1, number 2 piston, which would usually be here, is now going to go here. When you're looking on, when you're looking at the Ford pistons, factory ones, if you still got the stock rods, Ford is nice enough to stamp. So this is a number 2. Says it right there. They even went as far as to stamp the same thing on your rod cap. If you guys can see that. So I got a number 2 here on the connecting rod. Come on, focus. Number two here, number two here. These are the sides that made up. The other thing is there's little tangs on the on the rod bearing in the cap and in the rod. These are actually going to mate up. The two tang sides stay together, so they're going to press fit just like that when it's actually installed with the crank in between. Now we're on to number two. Nice liberal coating of oil on your rings. Make sure these are offset. Make sure you're pointing towards the back since we're doing them backwards. Needs a little bit of assistance dropping that down, but not too bad. Just getting it seated in the cup, rather. Moving the crank a little bit here, just to give me a little bit more room. You do want to pay attention to where the crank is at in relation to the rods that you're putting in. This one now is dropped completely down. A little assembly lube on your crank journals is a good idea too. Now I got this down at the bottom of the stroke, so it gives me plenty of clearance to get this rod in. Make sure that stays centered up. Holding the rod bolts so they're not hitting anything on the crank. Good there. Bottomed out, ready to go. Grab the cap. Grab your bolts. Like I said, this tool, you just got to give it a little bit of squish on that initial to get the rings into the tool. Once you're in there, you're fine. Reach underneath, hold the main. I mean, I don't even know if I need a hammer for this, to be completely honest. It just gets harder going deeper in the bore, so just to be safe. Nice and seated. I'll finish up these four and then the next four, since it's exactly the same. I'll get these four done, and then I will bring you guys down to the bottom of the car, so you can actually, or the bottom of the motor, so you can see what I'm doing on the bottom side. I know you can only get the top view right now, but that's okay. It's not really all that special. There's two nuts that go on the end of each of these rod studs. Let's move on to the last one. We get number 4, aka 8. If anybody's had terrible experience with this, that's actually tested it or known, there's a lot of people debating that. I know, what was it, Uncle Tony and the Motor Trend guys, I think. I don't remember what his name was, Steve. Some big thing, if you're following any of the at-home kind of engine builder people. Can't do anything on the internet anymore without being judged, critiqued, or yelled at. That's great. Take it with a grain of salt. There's a plethora of information. I have learned more than I can say from that than anything else. And I got a master's degree. But, yeah, a little bit of understanding, and a little bit of willingness to try things and mess up shows you a lot. Like how to not put pistons in the brand new tool that you bought correctly. Kind of like when I was working on the Falcon this morning, getting the rear leaf springs out, or the perches. If anybody works on leaf springs in the Midwest, I'm sure you've experienced what I went through this morning. But I had a buddy of mine come by, gave me a hand, which was really nice. Surprised me he had the day off of work. Just kind of showed up, which is always encouraged. But showed up, gave me a hand with that. Ended up messing around quite a bit. Sitting here trying to cut the thing off with a sawzall and bearing multiple blades. I probably went through like 15 different blades. Good ones too, not cheap crap, but trying to cut through some of those hardened bolts in the sleeve that goes into the bushing. And after I couldn't get the last one, I got three. I got 2 bolts on the shackles, there's 3 of them. 3 of them I was able to get free or break out, cut off with the sawzall to free it up. The last one fought the entire way. I couldn't even get it to cut a starter groove. So we were sitting there playing around and came up with the idea to run to the store and grab a 6-inch grinder disc for a 4-inch angle grinder or 4.5-inch angle grinder. Gave me enough clearance to get the blade in, and I'll post some videos of that later on. But yeah, sometimes doing what the instructions tell you not to actually works if you got a little bit of an understanding in your head. Super sketchy, don't recommend it, but it worked. Leaf springs are out, and now I get to figure out what to do with those next. Oh. Alright, rods are in. Finger tight. Again, I'm going to retorque everything on the bottom side of this motor when I come around to it. But we're going to give this a quick rotation, make sure everything's still moving free like it's supposed to. Nothing's hitting or binding. Everything feels pretty good right there. Alright. Rotate this block over. Then we get to do the same thing all over again. I am going to switch the angle here. Give me a second. I'm going to wipe my hands down and move you guys.